So we're in the middle of a series on what the church is. And we've talked about the church being the place where true love is lived. And we've talked about the church being the body of Christ and how we become the church in the world. And this week's theme is the church is a place that is renewing and reforming. And I love this topic because I'm a change junkie. I want new things all the time. Maybe you've gathered that. And someone said to me, nobody likes change. And I don't get that, actually. I don't get that. Nobody likes change. We all love change. That's what happens when you see the world through your own eyes. So in the last week, I've been writing this sermon based on the Who Stole My Church series that we had, because we talked a lot about change during that and about renewal and transition. I had some charts that I was going to share with you and talk about why it's hard to change and all those things. And I was up late last night and early this morning and really had like 2,300 words, which for me is 23 minutes. So maybe you'll be happy to know that on my way here, I decided that just wasn't the way to go. It seemed a bit preachy to me, and for a minister to say something is too preachy, you got to know it is. So instead, I thought I would share something maybe that hits a little bit closer to home and relate that to our gospel story today. So just to review the gospel story, there's a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years. And in that culture, when a woman is having her period, you're not allowed to be near her or touch her. I read this book once called The Year of Living Biblically, and this guy wanted to follow all the laws in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible, and when his wife was having a period, he wasn't able to sit on a chair that she had sat on unless it could be, made clean. And so he asked her very nicely if she could just sit on this one chair so he could avoid it. And she promptly went to every chair in the house and sat on them. But it gives you an idea. In some cultures, when women have their periods, they sit on a stone until it's done, right? We get a sense of how this woman was feeling unclean and removed from her community, and she'd been bleeding for 12 years. She'd spent all her money on the doctors trying to get better. And in this process, she was alienated from her family. They'd probably kicked her out, and everyone else. And all she wanted was to be part of the community again. And so she hears that Jesus is coming, and she thinks, I'm going to go see him. And maybe his power is so great, I've heard of his healing power, that all I need is a touch from him, and I will be healed. And then she starts to think of what's going to get in the way of that touch. She starts to think, well, he's never going to touch me because I'm unclean. How am I going to be able to be healed? And so she decides, well, you know what? I'm going to find Jesus in the middle of a crowd, and I'm just going to reach out and touch him, and he'll never know it's me. I can be invisible. I can hide who I am and just touch him, and maybe, just maybe, I will be healed. And so the story goes that she's in this crowd, and Jesus has just gotten this request from someone to come and heal a daughter that is very ill, and he's on his way, and everybody's pushing around him. He's become quite popular. And he stops and he says, "Who touched me?" And his disciples are, what are you talking about, Jesus? Have you seen the crowds around you? It could have been just anyone. And Jesus says, I felt the power go from me. And he knew in that moment that there was someone in need of healing. And this woman who had hoped that she could just sneak in, become healed, and go home is forced to admit that she is the one who touched Jesus. But instead of being dismissed or set aside, Jesus says, go, your faith has healed you. And when Jesus talks about healing in the Christian scriptures, it's always about restoration. It's always about bringing those people back into community. That is what his ministry is about. So I heard this week a story Pam told me, actually, about someone that she had met with in her other job. I'll call him Dave because that's my husband's name. Dave is 60 years old. Dave has had a partner for 34 years, and Dave is gay. He's had nothing to do with the church in his life. And he was sitting somewhere on a bus or some other place, and he picked up a tract, what they call a tract, which said, "You are loved." And somehow that spoke to him in a way that just touched a spiritual yearning. And he turned it over, and it had been provided by one of the mega churches in town. And so he decided, these people will love me, and I'm going to go there. He went to the church, liked the music, probably the preaching was good. For whatever reason, he decided, I want to be a part of this. And he went to what was called an alpha group, which is almost like a training session for people who want to understand more about their faith. And so after a few weeks of the alpha session, and when you have an alpha session, you have supper together, and you talk with each other, and there's conversation, and he really felt like he was starting to know these people. He decided he wanted to be baptized. And so he went to the leader, and he asked if that would be possible. And she says to him, "Are you married?" And he says, "Well, no, but I've had a partner for 34 years. And she says, "Well, you know, the Bible doesn't approve of people who are living together and not married." And then she says, "And I need to tell you that we won't baptize a homosexual." And so this man who had come into this community, and this community is Jesus on earth, right? This community is the body of Christ at work. All of a sudden is feeling like because of his life and his love, he is not acceptable. Now, many people who have been dismissed by the church for various reasons go, and they never come back. It's almost like Jesus said, you know, brush the dust off your feet and move on. And that's what they do, understandably. But Dave decided he wanted to explore this further, and he went online and he started looking for communities that were accepting of gay people. And he found one, went to church, talked to the minister, who then said, "You should talk to Pam." And she told me she had coffee with him for an hour this week. And he told his story, and he came in feeling heavy. He'd found something in this spiritual community that had touched him, and it was hard for him to let it go. And she began to say, "You are okay the way you are. You are loved and accepted. God does not require that you change who you are to be part of the community. And those places that say, 'I will not baptize you because you're gay,' are not God's way." And she said as she started to talk to him, she could feel the burden lifting off of him. That he was okay with who he was, that his life with his partner of 34 years was a blessing, and that God was in all of this. And I thought, that man is like that woman. He's been disenfranchised. He's been marginalized. He's been told that God is not with him. He is somehow unclean. And it just breaks my heart that he went to a religious community that told him he should be ashamed of who he is. And so when I think about change and transformation and reforming, those stories are at the center of what the church should be. And when we asked ourselves what needs to die in order for us to live, there are some things embedded in both these stories that we really need to think about. The first is that religiosity, or bad religion as I call it, needs to die in favor of a spirituality that is alive and moving and breaking down barriers. The second thing is that we need to stop ostracizing people for who they are and choices they've made, and instead welcome people into the community. We need to concentrate on holy love instead of holy books. And we need to stop using the Bible as a weapon that separates us. And when it comes to the sacraments, someone comes to our church and says, I want to baptize my baby, or they want to be baptized, I always say yes. I don't care if they're part of this community or ever will be again. If they have a moment where they say, I want the sacred in my life and in the life of my child, and I'm going to bring this child into this community for God to touch our lives, I will never say no. And those places that have set up barriers to inclusion and communion and baptism and weddings and all those things are forgetting that Jesus was always about bringing in, not pushing away. And so how do we reform and renew? We learn and we hope and we dream that this place is not just about us. It's about the Daves of the world who are looking for a moment of sacred unity. And so we welcome them and we move forward. That is my hope. That is my prayer. Love. Amen. I invite you